This is going to be a quick one because I did want to get something up tonight. These are the LynchNW MOD2 Spyderco Delica scales. And the reason I'm getting this up tonight is because these drop pretty infrequently, but they happen to be dropping on LynchNW site tomorrow. And as you'll see in this relatively quick review here, these are worth looking into, especially if you love the Delica. So what are these? These are $150 aftermarket scales for the Spyderco Delica that turn it into a full titanium knife. Obviously, I've got an S30V Wharncliffe Delica here, but they will work with any Delica. Just for comparison, here is a stock Spyderco Delica. This is the super blue version with the Zome scales. And you can see right up front, there are some pretty significant differences between what these scales do for the Delica and the stock scales. This is not just a titanium version of the stock scale, but a new design that fundamentally changes the way the knife feels in the hand. And I will say one more time, I have not had as much time with these scales as I typically do before I review a knife, though I did have a set of these scales about a year and a half ago that I spent a little bit more time with. So these are really between initial impressions and a full review, but because these are going to be up for sale tomorrow, not this set, but Lynch will have new ones up for sale tomorrow, I did want to get this in so anybody can look at it if they're curious about the scales. So, biggest differences between in the shape overall, and then we'll get into some of the details, between these MOD2 scales and the stock Delica. The biggest one is right up front here. So your stock Delica does not have a full finger choil, and that is consistent with most of Spyderco's older knife designs. They instead have a little kick here. You can put your finger in there if you really want to, and I quite frequently do. You can wedge your finger there, and it's decently secure, but it's nowhere near as secure as a full finger choil. What Lynch did with these scales here is they took that kick and moved it back, so now you do have what functions as a full finger choil, a full forward finger choil right there on the knife, and you get that typical Spyderco pinch grip right there. You obviously don't have jimping on the bottom edge of this choil, but it works just as well as most of Spyderco's fully jimped choils, and it's just a great spot to anchor this knife, and it gives you tons of control over that blade, as Spyderco front finger choils tend to. It's a really nice addition, a really nice detail, and basically takes one of the drawbacks of these older Spyderco designs, which unlike a lot of modern designs, they don't have that front choil, brings it to the Delica, and it feels definitely like an upgrade to me. To have that just brings that feature there. And then they also Lynch skinnied out the rest of the body here. So where the Delica has its sort of signature, basically indexing notches here, where you've got a big indexing notch, a big notch here for your front couple fingers with a couple others, and it sort of gets fatter as you get toward the back. So you get these very nice, very natural ergonomics here that makes this knife fit great in the hand despite being a smaller knife. They have skinnied out the whole thing, simplify the design. You still have a bit of that swell toward the back here, but the butt is fatter. The whole thing loses those indexing notches, and so the whole knife ends up feeling, especially in this grip, ends up feeling much more neutral in the hand. Now again, when you choke up, you've got that choil there, so now you can, with that choil, you can easily climb all the way to the top of the blade or pinch back on that jimping there, and it ends up feeling very nice, but it is definitely a different feel in the hand. Here, as with a typical skinny scale, works best when your three fingers are sort of going anywhere they need to across this big open flat area. The back here goes right into the sort of meat of your palm, just like that. This pinch grip, or this sort of saber style grip, works very nicely up in this choil. This is a very secure choil. When you do go back and have all four fingers in the flat, and I will be upfront, I'm not the biggest fan of skinny scales in general, this doesn't feel all that secure to me, having all four fingers. There's nothing keeping my fingers from moving around here. Going up to this jimping feels a little bit of a stretch compared to the original Delica, which feels super secure in this grip. Because you've got more of these little notches to keep your fingers in place, this grip feels better to me on the stock Delica scales than on these MOD2 scales. So really, when you're thinking about the MOD2 scales, you're going to want to use it in this choked up grip with the choil, just purely if you're thinking about ergonomics. The ergonomics of this one are fantastic with that choil, when you're in that choil, but I actually like the ergonomics of the original Delica a little better. Let me just close this window because it just started pouring here. There we go. I do like the ergonomics of this original Delica scale a little bit better in this choked back grip. But that's just the ergonomic experience. And the ergonomic experience is very important. It's one of the best features of the Delica. And that's the biggest reason that you might not want to get these scales. If you don't like skinny scales, and if you don't like the idea of having that front choil, and you really like the traditional ergonomics of the Delica, these do change it pretty significantly. And for some people, they're not going to like what they get with this new scale design. The other difference is, obviously, this is a $150 upgrade on a knife that in most cases costs less than $150. This is more than doubling the price of the Delica. But that's where we can just start to look at these scales directly and see what you're getting. And what you're getting, you know, Lynch Northwest, everybody knows them for their clips, and they do make, I believe, the best aftermarket clips in the industry. I don't think I'm alone in that opinion. What you get with these scales are extraordinarily well-finished and well-fitted titanium scales for the Delica. Super nicely rounded, meshes very nicely with the back lock here. The back spacer that they give you a back spacer that gives you this lanyard hole right here. Actually, come to think of it, that's an addition here. The traditional Delica does not have a lanyard hole. This one does. That's part of why the back is fatter now. You can loop a lanyard through there if you want to. The clip is also changed. The clip is centered on the old Delica. On this one, it's sort of offset toward the bottom of the knife. By the way, ergonomically, this clip is fantastic when you're grabbing this knife, especially in your... And this leads me to believe this is really made for the choked up grip in that front choil. Your pinky will go right on that clip, and it's just a fantastic ergonomic experience. It fits perfectly. This is a really well-designed clip. Lynch designed this clip just for these scales. Obviously, it's his typical design, but this particular clip is made for these scales, and it fits perfectly. It's also nice when you have this in your pocket. The way this clip is offset toward one end of the knife, it just hangs very nicely in your pocket, takes up very little space. But the fit and finish on these scales in general is fantastic, as just about anything from Lynch Northwest is. Lynch is particularly exceptional at their surface finishes. This one is a sandblast, and it sort of sits between a typical Stonewash and a Chris Reeve sandblast. It doesn't have, I've got a Sebenza here, so it's not as rough and doesn't pick up as much patina as something like a Sebenza. You can see here if I compare the two, their sandblast is a little bit flatter, but it still has more texture to it, and it's more of a matte finish than your typical Stonewash. And the finish is applied really consistently. I mean, Lynch Northwest just kills it with their finishes. Every finish that they put together is really nicely done. They know how to finish titanium. They know how to put and some of the finishes they have in tomorrow's drop. I'm planning to pick up another set of these in tomorrow's drop. Some of the finishes that they put together are some of their DLC finishes, some of their anodized finishes are among the best in the industry. And so you can get not only some titanium scales for your Delica, you can get some pretty beautiful titanium scales that look better than anything that anybody else is putting out. Obviously, because these are titanium scales, these are going to be heavier than your stock Delica scales. This knife is noticeably heavier than the stock Delica. And because the scales are heavier, the balance point is further back. Basically, when you hold this knife, this feels more handle heavy. That makes it feel like it is suitable for slightly larger tasks than this guy. You know, the Delica, somewhat notoriously, it is a knife that you can push a little bit harder than it looks, but it is a small knife that feels like a small knife. And anytime you start to push a Delica into harder use tasks, it starts to feel a little skinny. It starts to feel a little flexy. It just doesn't feel like it's really keeping up. You throw these titanium scales on here, and this starts to feel like something like a Techno or something almost like a Swayback, where this starts to feel like a little knife that you can push hard. Combine that with the very nice ergonomic lines, especially in that choked up position, and it transforms the Delica quite a bit into something that, rather than just a small knife, starts to feel like a more general EDC that can do not just your lightweight EDC task, but your sort of mid-tier EDC task. And frankly, you throw some K390 on this, and it starts to almost start to look like something you can push a little bit harder, because you've still got that wonderfully thin blade stock, which is going to make all your cutting tasks easier, even when you're cutting through rough material. This was great for, cardboard boxes, stuff like that, stuff around the house. These scales work great, and in my experience, I like the experience of cutting with the Delica in most tasks better with these scales than with the stock ones. And I love the stock Delica scales. The exception is probably your very lightweight stuff, your more delicate stuff. Still, the pinch grip and this grip here and the little pinch grip and the fact that the Delica is so light in the pocket and in the hand, for those delicate tasks, these original scales still can't be beat. And for those delicate tasks, I still do prefer the original, but as a general EDC where I will be pushing the knife into harder use over the course of the day, that's where these scales really shine. Last detail, which is really cool, is, and you won't be able to see it here. No, you won't be able to really see it, but the Delica here, these FRN scales have full steel liners under them. And it's part of the reason that the Delica is not lighter than it is. In fact, I've got, actually let me just pull these out. I'm not going to disassemble my Delica, but the liners look like that. And yes, they're heavily skeletonized, but they still, add to the weight. And basically everything, all the internals of this Delica are riding on these liners, not on the FRN directly. The MOD2 scales remove the liners entirely. This is now a linerless knife. This is now just two pieces of titanium with a back lock and a back spacer and a clip and some screws. Now, that makes two big changes to the knife. First off, it makes it even thinner than your stock Delica. Not by much, but it is thinner. And when you consider that the Delica was already a very thin knife, this ends up feeling super thin in the pocket, which is just awesome. I mean, again, it really does. I keep coming back to this starts to feel like a slicier, slightly more utilitarian Techno with these scales on it, because it's a tough knife that is super slim and super carryable in the pocket. That's what this ends up feeling like, and really it ends up being a knife that fits a role kind of similar to your small Sebenza more than this large Sebenza, where you kind of forget that it's in your pocket, but then when you pull it out, it's really nice, it's really well finished, it feels higher end, but at the same time, it does pretty much everything you would need from it. Again, especially if you're putting a tougher steel on here, whether that's something in the S-V area or particularly K390. But it also changes the action pretty significantly, and this is the one area where my view is pretty preliminary. So basically, when I swapped because this had these teal scales here. When I swapped this out, it basically became a knife that was no longer broken in at all. Like 0%. It was as stiff as any knife I've had. And it is still breaking in. This right now is a two-handed closer for me. Because basically on these scales, all the interfaces between the washers and the scale itself, and frankly, even just the way the washers sat next to the blade, that all had to start breaking in again. And so it has gotten smoother, But this knife with these scales, first off, is very sensitive to pivot tension. If I tighten this up, it will lock up. If I loosen it, it will start to feel a little loose in a way that your stock Delica doesn't. You know, the stock Delica opens easily, closes easily, one-handed. It's one of the things that's great about this knife. The action, if you're used to backlock action, is super smooth, super easy, works very well. The action on this one right now is absolutely smooth. There's a bit of grit in there because I got it in some crap earlier. It's not gritty. There's physically sand and dirt in that pivot that I haven't been able to clean out yet. It feels very, very smooth and consistent on the open, but it is in no way even shake shut, let alone drop shut. I am pushing it open, pushing it closed the whole way. And I have not yet been able to get this to a place where it's really been a one-handed closer without introducing some blade play. When I had one of these before, which again was about 9 months ago, so my memory is quite distant, I do remember being able to get it to that action, so it's possible this is going to break in and get there eventually. But as of right now, it is smooth, but it almost feels more like a slip joint in terms of action, where it's a very deliberate open and a very deliberate close, not the sort of quite free and easy action that you get with a well broken in Delica. So that's the one thing that is a bit more of an acquired taste so far with these scales, is it leads to a very different action. So those are the differences. And so when we come to the big conclusion, which is, okay, should you get these scales? Should you spend $150 on your $100 knife to turn it into, from a knife with steel liners and FRN scales, into a titanium knife with no steel liners? And obviously, if you're watching this review, I have to assume you've got some interest in the Spyderco Delica. You wouldn't even be considering this if you don't love the Delica. And I haven't done my Delica review yet. That will be coming up, but I love the Delica. The Delica has a really good reason to exist even in 2023. This blade shape remains one of the best blade shapes on the market, and these handles, even your stock FRN handles, remain one of the best handle shapes on the market. It is just a fantastic EDC. And the fact is, there is no reason that you need to upgrade the Delica. The Delica is a great knife, but these MOD2 scales are a little surprising, because you might look at them and think, okay, I will get those if I want to turn my Delica into a titanium Delica. Sort of like with rock scales, what they do for the PM2, for the PM3, for the bug out, all that sort of stuff, where, okay, I want the same feel, but I want it in titanium. That might be what you're thinking. That's not what these MOD2 scales do. They do that. They turn it into a titanium Delica, but unlike, and the reason that I've got these in a bag here, unlike Flytanium's Delica scales, which, spoiler alert on this review, I am much less of a fan of. Review coming up on those, but have not had a great experience with them. These turn the Delica into a very different knife. And in fact, let me just go get my... Okay, I can't actually find my small Sebenza right now, so instead I will get my small Inkosi. This ends up making the Delica feel more like a Chris Reeve. Not just in the sense that now you are touching... there it is. Here's my small Sebenza. So let's get, because it's more similar, this ends up making your Delica feel like a Chris Reeve. Not just in the sense that you're now touching titanium, and in many cases now touching sandblasted titanium, but in the sense that this turns the Delica from what feels like a small, fragile knife into what feels like a small, robust knife. There's no even hint of play anywhere in this knife. This feels rock solid, and honestly, I bet you if I got some aftermarket washers on this, I could get the action to be really, really good. The teeny tiny washers that the Delica comes with probably just aren't that well suited for this scale here. But what you get with the MOD2 scales is you get something that turns the Delica into a tough little knife, into something that you feel like you can push, that feels super secure, that doesn't feel like it's going to budge, that you can really choke up on and bear down with, and that isn't going to bend, isn't going to flex, and is going to feel solid and tough in the hand, very much like a Sebenza. And in fact, when you look at the profile of these closed up, and pretend this was a normal Delica blade, which wouldn't stick out as far, not this Warney blade. It's quite a bit larger in the pocket than your small Sebenza still, but it is skinnier in the pocket. It's about the same weight. And when you pop it out, you're getting a similar amount of blade. And you're getting similar blade stock. So, and frankly, you're getting close to similar in price. This is, if let's say you get it in K390, which is the objectively correct choice, this is a $120 knife. Actually, no, you're still quite a bit cheaper now that I think about it. This is about a $125 knife with $150 scales on, so this is about $275. These are about $400. But these end up feeling very, very similar with these scales on them. This starts to feel like a very capable little knife instead of just a little knife. I love this little knife, but it feels like a little knife. And so, with the addition of that choil, with the sense of robustness that these scales give you, there's part of me that thinks, okay, if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I've only got $300. I want something that is as close to the feeling of a Sebenza as I can get, and I want the best steel I can get, and I want the best manufacturing quality I can get. It's not a bad suggestion to get a Delica. Again, I would get the traditional blade shape, not this one. It's not a bad suggestion to say, get a K390 Delica and slap some MOD2 scales on it. You're going to get an experience that in a lot of ways takes a lot of the things that people, including me, love about the small Sebenza. And I haven't done my small Sebenza review, but this is my favorite knife, the small Sebenza. Literally my single favorite. If you told me I could keep one, I would keep the small Sebenza. This does a really good job of taking a lot of what I love about the small Sebenza and putting it in this package. So, especially this second time around, I have been really impressed with these MOD2 scales from Lynch Northwest, and I think they are seriously worth considering. So, again, these will be on sale on Lynch Northwest site tomorrow. This isn't sponsored or anything like that. It's just I happened to get these, and I wanted to get this out because he drops them pretty infrequently, once every few months. They sell out very quickly, and they generally sell on the secondary market for more than the cost of them. So, they're expensive, but if you know what you're getting, they're absolutely worth a try. And Lynch Northwest, they're good people. So you happen to be supporting an American brand, and I love their packaging. If you haven't seen Lynch Northwest packaging, I don't usually talk about packaging, but they really do go the extra mile with their packaging. The way they put everything together, the way they have these custom little boxes, and literally they still hand sign notes to every single person. Is that, does that change the fact that it's $150 for 2 pieces of titanium? No, but it's very nice to see. So yeah, if you've been intrigued about these, give them a look, give them a shot. And I bet you if you're the sort of person that will consider spending $150 on scales for your Delica, I think you're going to like them even more than you might expect. That's my review of the MOD2 scales for the Spyderco Delica. Hope this was helpful, and I will see you again soon.